So after discussing the first uh, two blocks about the history of English language and the sound systems and the mechanism of sounds, now we would like to discuss about the English morphology and how the words are created in English and how the word formation takes place in English. That is very important part to understand. You see, my friends, in linguistics, morphology is the identification, analysis and description of the structure of a given language, morphemes and other linguistic units, such as root words, affixes, parts of a speech, intonations, and stresses, or implied context. In contrast, morphological typology is the classification of languages according to their use of morphemes, while lexicology is the study of those words or forming a language's word stock. So, through actually this part, that is morphology, we would like to understand, my dear friends, that how the structure of the words is created and how we can, define the words as the root words and how the affixes and other parts can be included in the words and how the new words can be coined and how the new meanings can be got. So those are all different things that are going to be studied in this particular block, my dear friends. You see, while words along with cliches are generally accepted as being the smallest unit of syntax, it is clear that in most languages, if not all, words can be related to other words by rules that collectively describe the grammar for that language. For example, English speakers recognize that the words dog and dogs are closely related. English speakers recognize that words dog and dogs are closely related, differentiated only by the plurality morpheme, S. So only found bound to nouns. Speakers of English, a fusional language, recognize these relations from their tacit knowledge of English rules of word formation. They infer intuitively that dog is to dogs as cat is to cats. And in similar fashion, dog is to dog catcher as dish is to dishwasher. Language such as classical Chinese, however, also use unbound morphemes, free morphemes, and depend on post phrases, affixes, and word order to convey meaning. Most words in modern standard Chinese, that is known as Mandarin actually, as a standard language, however, are compounds and most roots are bound. So this is how, my dear friends, sounds are created. These are understood as grammars that represent the morphology of the language. The rules understood by a speaker reflect specific patterns or regularities in the way words are formed from smaller units in the language they are using and how those smaller units interact in speech. In this way, morphology is the branch of linguistics that studies patterns of word formation within and across languages and attempts to formulate rules and that model the knowledge of the speakers of those languages. So my dear friends, you see, morphology is that branch of language that studies patterns of word formation. Very important thing that we need to remember. Morphology is the branch of linguistics that studies patterns of word formation within and across languages and attempts to formulate rules that model the knowledge of the speakers of those languages. Now here comes inflection versus word formation actually. How actually the words can be created, how word gives a meaning, a particular meaning actually, how a particular meaning is created from a particular word. So how actually the words are related with each other. So these are all the things that are going to be studied in this, block. Given the notion of a lexeme, It is possible to distinguish two kinds of morphological rules. Some morphological rules relate to different forms of the same lexeme, while other rules relate to different lexemes. Rules of the first kind are inflectional rules, while those of the second kind are rules of word formation. The generation of the English plural dogs from dog is an inflectional rule. Try to understand, my dear friends. The generation of the English plural dogs from dog is an inflectional rule, while compound phrases and words like dog, catcher, or dishwater are examples of word formation. Informally, word formation rules form new words, more accurately, new lexemes, while inflection rules yield variant forms of the same word, lexeme. The distinction between inflection and word formation is not at all clear-cut. That we have to understand, my dear friends. The distinction between an inflection and word formation is not at all clear. There are many examples where linguists fail to agree whether a given rule is inflection or word formation. The next section will attempt to clarify this distinction actually. So later on, slightly, by and by, we will try to understand actually as to what goes into the making of the words, as to what are the features that are responsible for the inflection and the word formation actually. So how we can come to a conclusion actually. So all those things we would like to discuss. Word formation is a process, as we have said and discussed, where one combines two complete words, whereas with inflection, you can combine a suffix with some verb to change its form to subject of the sentence. For example, in the present indefinite, we use go with subject, whether I or we or you or they, whatever can be the subject actually. And plural nouns, whereas for the third person singular pronouns, that is either he or she or it, whatever. And with singular nouns, we use goes. That is very clear. I think you will not have any difficulty in understanding that actually. You see, in the present indefinite case, when the subject is plural, we use go. And when the subject is singular or the singular nouns are there, we use goes. So this ES is an inflectional marker and is used to match with its subject. It's a very important information, my dear friends. That you see here we are making a distinction actually. This ES, what is this ES actually? This is an inflectional marker. And this is used to match with its subject. A further difference is that in word formation, the resultant word may differ from its source word's grammatical category, whereas in the process of inflection, the word never changes its grammatical category. So that is the major difference. That is the major difference, my dear friends. You see, in the grammatical category, but in the process of inflection, the word never changes its grammatical category. So that is the major difference, my dear friends, and that we have to notice and understand. There is a further distinction between two kinds of morphological word formation. The further distinction that we would like to understand, my dear friends, now, that is derivation and compounding. The further distinction or the next distinction is of derivation and compounding. Compounding is a process of word formation. What is compounding? Compounding is a process of word formation that involves combining complete word forms into a single compound form. For example, dog catcher, therefore is a compound, as both dog and catcher are complete word forms in their own right, but are subsequently treated as parts of bun form. It's a very good example actually. We need to understand it. The example is dog catcher actually. It's a compound word actually. Because dog and catcher, they both of them are complete in their own sense. Derivation involves affixing bound, that is non-independent forms to existing lexemes, whereby the addition of the affix derives a new lexeme. The word independent, for example, is derived from the word dependent by using the prefix in, while dependent itself is derived from the verb depend. So that is the another difference, my dear friends. And this is how this difference can be located actually. This difference can be located and understood. Types of word formation. Paradigms and morphosyntax. A linguistic paradigm is the complete set of related word forms associated with a given lexeme. The familiar examples of paradigms are the conjugations of verbs and the declensions of nouns. Accordingly, the word forms of a lexeme may be arranged conveniently into tables by classifying them according to shared inflectional categories such as tense, aspect, mood, number, gender, or case. For example, the personal pronouns in English can be organized into tables using the categories of person, first person, second person, third person, number, singular number, plural number, gender, masculine, feminine, neuter gender, common gender, etc. And case, nominative case, genitive case, subjective case, objective case, possessive case, reflexive case, etc. So, you see, we can divide the categories actually, we can put them into categories, we can finalize their categories, and this is how we can decide. The inflectional categories used to group word forms into paradigms cannot be chosen arbitrarily. They must be categorized that are relevant to stating the syntactic rules of the language. For example, person and number are categories that can be used to define paradigms in English. Because English has grammatical agreement rules that require the verb in a sentence to appear in an inflectional form that matches the person and number of the subject. In other words, the syntactic rules of English care about the difference between dog and dogs. Because the choice between these two forms determines which form of the verb is to be used. In contrast, however, no syntactic rule of English cares about the difference between dog and dog catcher, or dependent and independent. The first two are nouns and the second two are adjectives. And they are generally behave like they are noun or adjective behaves. An important difference between inflection and word formation is that inflected word forms of lexemes are organized into paradigms. That is the very important difference you see, my dear friends. The important difference between inflection and word formation is that the inflected words forms of lexemes are organized into paradigms which are defined by the requirements of syntactic rules. Whereas the rules of word formation are not restricted by any corresponding requirements of syntax. Inflection is therefore said to be relevant to syntax, and bud formation is not. Very important point, my dear friends. Inflection is therefore said to be relevant to syntax, and bud formation is not. The part of morphology that covers the relationship between syntax and morphology is called morphosyntax. The part of morphology that covers the relationship between the syntax and morphology is called morphosyntax and concerns itself with inflection and paradigms, but not with bud formation or compounding. So these are very important things, my dear friends. These are very, very important things, pointing things actually that we need to notice. Now further we go, our morphological rules are described as analogies between word forms. Dog is to dogs as cat is to cats and as dish is to dishes. In this case, the analogy applies both to the form of the words and to their meaning in each pair. The first word means one of X, while the second two or more of X. And the difference is always the plural form S affixed to the second word, signaling the key distinction between singular and plural entities. So there are differences actually. And the plural form where S is affixed to the second word, that signals actually that is the difference of singular and plural entities. One of the largest sources of complexity in morphology is that this one-to-one correspondence between meaning and form scarcely applies to every case in the language. In English, there are word form pairs like ox, oxen. We must have heard about it. And there are some pairs like ox, oxen, goose, geese, sheep, sheep, where the difference between the singular and the plural is signaled in a way that departs from the regular pattern or is not signaled at all. Where there is no difference actually between the singular and plural, and it is signaled by the pattern actually, by the some kind of difference actually, and sometimes there is no difference at all. Sometimes we do not notice any kind of difference, you see. Even cases regarded as regular such as S are not so simple. The S in dogs is not pronounced the same way as the S in cats. And in plural such as dishes, a vowel is added before the S. These cases where the same distinction is affected by the alternative forms of a bird constitute allomorphy. That is allomorphy actually. Because there is a distinction actually, and that distinction is alternative. We cannot decide that. It is decided automatically actually, and that constitutes a new branch, that is allomorphy. Further we go for it. Phonological rules constrain which sounds can appear next to each other in a language. And morphological rules, when applied blindly, would often violate phonological rules, while resulting in sound sequences that are prohibited in the language in question. For example, to form the plural of dish by simply appending an S to the end of the word would result in the form dish, which is not permitted by the phonotactics of English. In order to rescue the bird, a vowel sound is inserted between the root and the plural marker And this is results. Similar rules apply to the pronunciation of the S in dogs and cats. It depends on the quality, voiced versus unvoiced, of the final preceding phony. So it is not as simple as we think, my dear friends, actually. There are so many rules go into it that decide as to how it has to go, as to how it has to function, as to how it has to be pronounced. So this is how it is pronounced. Now we come for lexical morphology. Lexical morphology, my dear friends, it is the branch of morphology that deals with the lexicon, which morphologically conceived is the collection of lexemes in a language. As such, it concerns itself primarily with word formation, derivation, and compounding. Now we come for English syntax, my dear friends. What is syntax actually, and how syntax works in English language? That we would like to understand. We also would like to understand the definitive part of the syntax. In linguistics, syntax is the study of the principles and processes by which sentences are constructed in particular language. That is the definition of syntax, my dear friends. What is syntax? Syntax is the study of the principles and processes by which sentences are constructed in particular language. The term syntax is also used to refer directly to the rules and principles that govern the sentence structure of any individual language. Modern research in syntax attempts to describe languages in terms of such rules. The term syntax is also used to refer to the rules governing the behavior of mathematical systems, such as formal languages used in logic, etc. So the syntax is also used for rules that govern actually the behavior of mathematical systems, etc. Now we would like to discuss the modern theories of syntax actually, and what are the primary theories that are talking about syntax actually. There are a number of theoretical approaches to the discipline of syntax. One school of thought founded in the works of Derek Bickerton. One of the schools of thought founded in the works of Derek Bickerton sees syntax as a branch of biology. Very important point actually, my dear friends. He says syntax as a branch of biology since it conceives of syntax as the study of linguistic knowledge and as embodied in the human mind. Other linguists, Gerald Guzar, take a more Platonistic view since they regard syntax to be the study of an abstract formal system. Yet others, for example, Joseph Greenberg, consider syntax a taxonomical device to reach broad generalizations across languages. So, there are different ideologies, there are different ideas, there are different mindsets, there are different systems actually for syntax, as syntax is related actually. Derek calls it a branch of biology. There is a very important notion. The hypothesis of generative grammar is that language is a structure of the human mind. The goal of generative grammar is to make a complete model of this inner language known as I language. This model could be used to describe all human language and to predict the grammaticality of any given utterance. That is, to predict whether the utterance would sound correct to native speakers of the language. This approach to language was pioneered by Noam Chomsky. Most generative theories, although not all of them, assume that syntax is based upon the constituent structure of sentences. Generative grammars are among the theories that focus primarily on the form of a sentence rather than its communicative function. Among the many generative theories of linguistics, the Chomskyan theories are transformational grammar, that is known as TG grammar. Original theory of generative syntax laid out by Chomsky in Syntactic Structures in 1957. The second one is government and binding theory. That is the revised theory in the tradition of TG, developed mainly by Chomsky in 1970s and 80s. Third one is minimalist program, that is MP, a reworking of the theory out of the GB framework published by Chomsky in 1995. Apart from these three theories that were given by Chomsky, actually, there are some other theories, and other theories that find their origin in the generative paradigm are arc pair grammar, generalized phrase structure grammar, that is out of date these days actually. Generative semantics, largely out of date. Hand-driven phrase structure grammar, lexical functional grammar, nanosyntax, relational grammar, that is also out of date these days. Now we would like to discuss the categorical grammar. Categorical grammar is an approach that attributes the syntactic structure not to rules of grammar, but to the properties of the syntactic categories themselves. For example, rather than asserting the sentences are constructed by a rule that combines a noun phrase and a verb phrase, the phrase structure rule as NP, VP in categorical grammar. Such principles are embedded in the category of the head word itself. So the syntactic category for an intransitive verb is a complex formula representing the fact that the verb acts as a function word requiring an NP as an input and produces a sentence label structure as an output. This complex category is noted as NP S instead of verb plus NP and subject is read as a category that searches to the left indicated by. For an NP, the element on the left and outputs a sentence. The element on the right, the category of transitive verb is defined as an element that requires two NPs, its subject and its direct object, to form a sentence. This is noted as NP slash subject, which means a category that searches to the right indicated by for an NP that is object and generates a function equivalent to the VP, which is NP slash subject, which in turn represents a function that searches to the left for an NP and produces a sentence. This is dependency grammar. Dependency grammar is an approach to sentence structure where syntactic units are arranged according to the dependency relation, as opposed to the constituency relation of phrase structure grammars. Dependencies are directed links between words. The finite verb is seen as the root of all clause structure, and all the other words in the clause are either directly or indirectly dependent on this root. Some prominent dependency-based theories of syntax are algebraic syntax, functional generative description, meaning text theory, operator grammar, and word grammar. And here we come for the functional theories of grammar. Functionalist theories, although focused upon form, are driven by explanation based upon the function of a sentence, its communicative function. Some typical functionalist theories include cognitive grammar, construction grammar, emergent grammar, functional discourse grammar, Parag linguistic circle, role and reference grammar, systemic functional grammar, and these are the important areas you see of the functional grammar, my dear friends. So hope you have got my idea about the different categories and the dividations of morphemes. Thank you.